Morning, Mark. How you doing today?
Good. How are you, Joe?
Excellent. Understand you had a good conversation with James Thomson from Buy Box Experts in the Prosper Show.
That's right. Yeah, James and I have known each other for a couple of years, so I thought I'd reach out to him, see if he would talk about what makes a good, sustainable Amazon business. The conversation was fantastic. It was very interesting.
I tell you what James does for a living has always been a bit of a mystery to me because he does so many different things. But the thing I do get is that he's a hardworking, honest, trustworthy, good guy that if I had somebody I wanted to do business with, it would be him. So I don't fully understand what he does. So I'm so glad that you've done the interview so I can get it. But I've always liked him. He's a good guy, full of good character. I'd want to do business with him.
You and I both know working in this business, you get to deal with some really, really intelligent people. And those people sort of stand out. There's everyone we deal with is very, very smart. But then every now and then you deal with somebody who just kind of blows you away and you can tell that they are on a different plane than you. James is one of those guys in my world where every time I talk to him, he just, the amount of intelligence he displays is just kind of on another level. So yeah, he's one of the founders of Prosper Show. We're going to be displaying at Prosper Show next March. We were sponsors last year. I spoke at the last two Prosper shows. It's a really good show for Amazon sellers. If anyone's an Amazon seller, I would recommend going to it. We do have a discount code that we can give you. We don't get any commission for this. It's just one of those shows that I actually think is worthwhile going to. But James was one of the first Amazon account managers out there. So he kind of was at the forefront of this whole thing. So what I wanted to talk to him about in this interview, I really wanted to get into what makes a sustainable Amazon business versus a not sustainable Amazon business. And I think a lot of people, and I've been pretty public with the fact that I'm bearish on some Amazon businesses. I think people need to be careful about what they're buying because some Amazon businesses are just not that robust. And I think that they have the potential to possibly dry up in a few years. So I wanted to go to James and get his opinion on what he would look for if he were to buy an Amazon business, and how do you build something on Amazon that's going to be sustainable for the long term? And he gave me a nice hierarchy of businesses that are more sustainable than others. With the least sustainable being just kind of the turn and burn. You're buying somebody else's product and reselling it, and anybody can do that.
Right.
Based off the competition now. I mean, those businesses are not really sustainable. All the way up to kind of the highest level being you own the brand, you own the product. But there's a couple of things that were really fascinating about what he talked about. And one of them was the idea of this continual product creation. Even if you have a good product line, having this continual product creation, and it couldn't help but remind me of the deal that you did a few years ago. If you remember, I don't want to get into details of everything that happened there, but it was that woman who started a business and she basically had one product line and it got crowded out pretty quickly.
Right. Those were the days of putting up 1,000 reviews, giving away products, and still having them be verified. Amazon fortunately has sort of fixed that problem, and I think it's much tougher these days to be really, really good at selling on Amazon. And I think what James is probably going to talk about and allude to is that you want to have a brand that you can take well beyond Amazon and well beyond one sort of product line or SKU, that being a variation of a garlic press, for instance. You can go to all sorts of kitchen utensils instead and take it well beyond Amazon, which is what I'd look for if I was buying a business of that nature.
Absolutely. So it's safe to say that after talking to him, I actually feel a bit better about Amazon businesses, as long as you're buying the right one. So why don't we go ahead, take a look at the interview and hear what he has to say. Thanks, James, so much for joining us. James is from Prosper Show. And James, I'll let you introduce yourself. You have your hand in a lot of different places. So why don't you go ahead and give yourself a bit of an introduction.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm James Thomson. I am formerly of Amazon. I used to run Amazon Services, which is the group that just about all Amazon sellers registered to be an Amazon seller. I now run an agency called Buy Box Experts, as well as running the Prosper Show, which is a continuing education conference for Amazon sellers. One that I believe you've participated in, Mark. Thank you very much. So I like to participate in educational discussions with sellers and try to find ways to help sellers be productive, build long-term businesses. Having been at Amazon, I was basically, one might say I was part of the enemy. I was part of the problem. I like to now be helping sellers on this side and say, listen, we all want to make money. We all want to make a living doing this, but it's hard. It's really hard. And you've got to keep your eyes open, and you've got to look out for the right types of activities, and you've got to stay away from the wrong type of activities. So thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, again, super excited to have you on. And yes, I do know you from Prosper Show. So remember when you called me, I think now about 3 years ago, and I thought, oh man, somebody else just kind of calling me, cold calling. Yeah. But it was a really good call. One of those things that I look back on, I'm super glad I was able to pick up the phone. Prosper Show, for anyone that has not attended, it is by far the most valuable show for Amazon sellers out there. We sponsored it last year. We're going to sponsor again this year. I've spoken at it the past 2 years, and honestly, it's a phenomenal show. So I believe, I don't know if we have a discount code or not. I can work that out with you, James, later. But if we do, well, we'll make sure that we include that for anyone that wants to register. But I would highly recommend going. And if nothing else, you can stop by and see us as well. So what I want to talk about today, James, I want to talk about a few different things. But first, your group announced something pretty big recently. We're not going to focus a lot on sales tax. We've got some articles on our blog about it, and we plan to have some guests on to talk about the sales tax issues. But why don't you go ahead and for anyone that isn't familiar with what your group announced recently regarding the sales tax issue, go ahead and announce that right now to our group.
Sure. So we believe the number one liability that FBA sellers today have is not remitting taxes properly, not paying the sales tax on the sales they're making through FBA. For those of you who haven't been exposed to this issue yet, when you put products into Amazon's warehouses, Amazon moves them around to other warehouses, and it doesn't take long for your products to have hit the shelves of potentially as many as 24 different states worth of Amazon fulfillment centers. When your product sits in those warehouses, the current interpretation of the law is that in most of those states, you now have a sales tax responsibility, which means you're responsible for paying sales tax on all of those orders. It's a really scary concept because taxes are very complicated and every state does things a little bit differently. But the bottom line is most FBA sellers are wildly non-compliant when it comes to paying sales tax. And we've estimated that about 5% of all revenue that FBA sellers generate, about 5% of it per year is accumulated unpaid sales tax liability. So if you sell $1 million of product a year, you probably have about $50,000 of sales tax liability. That is to say, revenue you haven't appropriately paid to the various states where your product has sat in an FBA facility. When you multiply that across many millions of dollars and many years of sales, you could have a pretty big liability. Many states are getting very aggressive at finding and auditing Amazon sellers. We've seen things like my current state where I live in Washington State, very aggressively going after large sellers. California, New York doing the same thing. 2 days ago, the state of Massachusetts sued Amazon and asked for the identity of every FBA seller that's had product in the state of Massachusetts. Imagine what happens if they succeed and every other seller, every other state that has an FBA facility asks for the same information. Basically, the game's over. So last year at Prosper, we had a speaker come from a group called the Multi-State Tax Commission, which is the group that's responsible for working with about 30 different states, helping level the playing field and educating folks on how to collect sales tax, when to collect sales tax, and so on. As a result of that discussion, Richard Cram, who is the director of the Multi-State Tax Commission, we worked with him after the show and we were able to put together a sales tax amnesty program, which is a program where, as of this morning, we now have 25 states and districts that are participating, allowing sellers to come forward and identify, hey, I've been selling in state whatever it is, XYZ. I haven't been paying sales tax, but I will start collecting and paying sales tax as of this moment. And in almost all of those 25 states, the seller basically gets forgiven all of the back taxes and penalties and interest they owe. There are 8 states of the 25 that are states that have Amazon FBA facilities. Unfortunately, we don't have New York. We don't have New York and California, but we do have Texas, which is one of the big states. And as I say, there's 8 total states that have FBA facilities. To learn more about whether or not you can participate in the sales tax amnesty program, the best place to go is actually either to mtc.gov, which is the organization, the Multi-State Tax Commission that's putting this on, or you can go to prospershow.com/sales-tax-amnesty. And we lay out what are all the terms that each state are offering, plus various types of companies that can help sellers to wade through all the regulations and paperwork necessary in order to get the amnesty program benefits. The program closes on October 17th. So you have less than a month to get your paperwork together, to talk to your CPA, to talk to your tax accountant, and get organized with the right paperwork so that you can hopefully get a bunch of your sales tax liability forgiven.
Well, and hopefully we can get this episode aired before that, and people still have time. We'll include links in whatever form. If you're hearing this on a podcast, you can go to the website, Quiet Light Brokerage website, or the sites that James mentioned, and we'll provide links. Or if you're viewing this on YouTube, we'll have it on YouTube as well. Very, very good. And by the way, with the sales tax issue, I know from our side, when it comes to selling an Amazon account, if you haven't taken care of that sales tax issue, it causes problems. We had one client who effectively lost almost $70,000 out of his deal because he hadn't been paying sales tax, and we had to put that money aside in order for the buyer to feel comfortable. The buyer didn't want to have to deal with the sales tax issue after the fact, so we put that $70,000 aside. The seller didn't get that at close. There was a slow rollout of that, but it did become an issue. So
$7,000 is actually pretty small peanuts compared to stuff we've seen. We know one of the Prosper attendees was able to save $75,000 just by participating in the amnesty program. And there are certainly even bigger sellers out there that we know that are not collecting and paying sales tax that could end up with multi-million-dollar penalties if in fact they were audited by all the appropriate states.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, I completely sympathize with all of the Amazon sellers out there that have not been paying sales tax in the past. Most people that I talk to, most sellers, I ask them, I say, well, are you paying sales tax? And they say, well, no, because my accountant never told me I had to. In fact, they said it wasn't a big issue. And then you get in this position where you think, well, I haven't been paying sales tax. Do I want to start now? And possibly key them off that I should have been paying in past years. It's kind of a catch-22. So this is a good program. We'll do our best to get this thing out before so that people still have time. We're also planning to publish a blog post on that, so I'll see if I can get that out here soon too.
Great.
All right, I want to move on to really what I want to talk about in this call, and that is the sustainability and how stable an Amazon business is. From a buyer's perspective, this is obviously important, right? You don't want to buy an Amazon business that's going to just collapse within a few months or have competitors flood the marketplace with copycat products and undercut you price-wise. So from a buyer's perspective, that's really important. From a seller's perspective, I know a lot of sellers are putting the businesses up for sale because they think, who knows what's going to happen down the road? I'm making good money now, but is this going to last for 2 or 3 more years? Right. And while obviously I appreciate the income that it provides for us to sell their businesses, I hate to see somebody give up a business that they could probably own for 5, 6, 7 years down the road. So what I want to ask you, James, is what would you advise buyers and sellers and people in general? What are some of the characteristics for an Amazon business which is sustainable in the long run? And maybe, I don't know, maybe it makes sense to look at it from the other direction. What are some of the characteristics of Amazon businesses that are not sustainable as well?
Well, let's start with what makes a business successful long-term on Amazon. And I'm saying this from the experience of having worked with literally thousands of companies who joined Amazon and failed fairly quickly because they didn't have certain basics in place. To be successful on Amazon, what I'm about to tell you are what I see as priorities. It's not by any means a comprehensive list. But the first thing I would encourage every seller to understand is their unit economics. Do you know for every SKU that you sell, do you know what your all-in profit or potentially loss is on every SKU? So have you looked at your acquisition costs? Have you looked at your transaction costs? Have you looked at your product development costs? Have you looked at your return-related costs? Have you looked at overhead and applied that to every sale that you make? if you have really good unit economic data for every SKU you sell, you'll very quickly be able to rationalize every SKU in your inventory. And what you'll find most likely is you're selling a bunch of product that the only person making money on is Amazon. And I don't know about you, but I'm not excited about trying to help Amazon make money. I'm here to help sellers make money. So if a seller has good economic data on its inventory broken down to the individual SKU, they can make very clear decisions around which products do I keep, which products do I get rid of, which products do I need to reprice, which products do I need to go back and try to negotiate lower manufacturing costs. Without unit economics, you can't do that. And you end up averaging everything, and you end up basically what I'll call smudge. You kind of smudge your way through things, and you end up wasting a lot of time helping somebody else make money, but not yourself. So
how if somebody's just putting stuff up on Amazon right now,
yep.
How would they go about getting that data?
Well, I mean, most sellers know their acquisition cost. They know that I paid $6 for this, and they know I sold it on Amazon for $10. They know what the selling commission is. They know what whether it's an FBA fee or their own shipping fee to get the product out to the customer. They know those kinds of costs. But then then the seller needs to dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, what is my return rate by product? Some products have a 5% return rate. Some have a 1% return rate. Okay. And again, all that data is in Seller Central. You can see how many returns you had, and you match it up to how many units you sold. You can figure out where your return rate is. Then you need to figure out what is my write-down or my write-off cost for every SKU. So putting that a little bit differently, when I do get a return product, how often do I have to toss it in the garbage? Or how often can I take it and maybe clean it up, repackage it, and sell it as used like new? Or in fact, maybe even be able to sell it as a new product because I've got extra packaging available that I can make it new again. For every product, you've got to know what your write-down or write-off costs are. If you sell, cream, for example, beauty cream, you're going to throw that in the garbage if it's returned. If you're selling, electronics, and you can test it and see that in fact it's still new, and you've got a new box you can put it in, you might be able to get a full recovery rate. So you've got to figure this out for every single SKU. The one area where most sellers fall down is understanding their overhead costs. So what does it cost to have a business license, to have the heat on, to be able to go to business meetings, to have subscriptions and memberships? You might have employees, you might have a warehouse, you might have a 3PL. All of those types of costs just to keep the lights on, that's your overhead. Figure out what that is. Let's say you tally it all up and it's $20,000 a year, and you sell 2,000 units. That's not a good number. You sell 20,000 units of product a year. Well, if you have $20,000 of cost and 20,000 units are sold, you have $1 of overhead that you have to apply to every unit you sell. Yes, all this stuff we're talking about, you're going to have to refresh the data every few months, because maybe you go from 20,000 units a year to 30,000 units a year. Well, that's great, but you still need to have a benchmark or rule of thumb of roughly how much overhead cost do I need to associate with every unit that I sell. When you tally up all these numbers, it doesn't need to be perfect. The point of this exercise is to understand what the relative profitability is of every single SKU, and to be able to identify all the SKUs that clearly are underwater. And if they're underwater, you have to make the decision, do I keep this and try to find a way to drive cost out of it? Or do I actually get rid of it and say, take my working capital and put it into some other kind of inventory? So step number one, unit economics. Get your unit economics in place. Make sure you refresh them at least every 6 months, if not more often than that. Number two, ask yourself where your competitive advantage is coming from. Are you a general merchandise reseller competing with 30 other guys doing exactly the same thing on exactly the same products? Are you all beating each other up on price? If you have no unusual sourcing opportunities, if you're just sourcing the same thing that anybody else with an account can go and get, you don't have a sustainable business. Because Amazon being an open marketplace, there's no limit to how much competition you can have on individual SKUs. When I first started Amazon 10 years ago, the concept of having too much competition was pretty much foreign. We didn't have that many sellers on the marketplace. Today, it's not unusual to find 60, 70, 80 competitors on the same SKU if it's a top 1,000 listing in a particular category. It's not a good long-term model to be in a situation where you just buy something that everybody else can also get, and you try to figure out how you can beat out the next guy by a penny or just enough to win the buy box. The reality is most of us will never be as big as the biggest seller out there who's figured out how to run 1 million units a month through their facility and keep their costs really low. Most of us will just never be there. So if acquiring product with nothing special in the sourcing is what our model is today, it's not going to work long term. So what a lot of sellers have done is they've moved to one of two models. Either they source exclusively from a particular brand and they say, hey, brand A, I'm awesome at selling on Amazon. Let me represent your brand on Amazon. Let me be the one that does all the branding, optimization of your listings, all your advertising, inventory management, and so on. In exchange for doing all that work, you're going to give me the exclusive. And lots of brands who are B2B companies and don't understand how to do B2C are quite happy to say, you know what, Mr. Seller, you're right. I don't understand Amazon and you do. You can be my exclusive reseller. And if the seller is really good at doing that and they've got the exclusives in place, that's a decent business model, but one where they have to continue to show the brand that, in fact, they're doing a good job representing the brand's interests. The third model that's quite common is brands, private label brands, where resellers are saying, I'm going to become the next private label brand. I'm going to go out and figure out how to source product and make it better than what's already on the site. If you're a private label brand, you can make a lot of money, but you have to be extremely disciplined in the process of how you identify products, but also how you continue to add selection to your catalog. The products you sell today are most likely not going to be the products that are making you the money in a year from now. Because the reality is there's thousands of other guys and gals out there doing the same thing, going to find ways to build their own private label brands. So, an example, if I make mixing bowls that you use in your kitchen, I may have some really great sourcing opportunity overseas to have that product made, and I get my brand name put on it. And lo and behold, I can sell it below what the national brand sells here in the United States. But the reality is there's always somebody who's willing to take less margin than me. And when that guy who's willing to take less margin shows up on Amazon with his version of the mixing bowls, I'm in a situation where I lose market share. So I have to always be looking for new products that I want to add to my catalog and be prepared to let go of products that I have in my catalog today. If you become too emotionally connected with the selection you carry, you will be demoralized very soon on Amazon. You have to treat these things as widgets. And every widget has its own P&L. Every widget you have to say, does this product still make sense for me to carry? If it doesn't, let's get rid of it. So between knowing what business model you're using to create differentiation and having the unit economics behind every one of those SKUs, you're definitely in a good situation. The third and final area where I believe sellers must excel is in operational discipline. You must have a daily process. You must have a weekly process. You must have a monthly process where you're looking at certain data and you're checking to see, is my inventory still in stock? Do I need to address certain types of backlogs of inventory? Do I have situations where the economics are shifting and I need to make adjustments? I view a seller's job is basically to walk down a hall that's dark and they're going to bounce off the walls. And their job is to course correct every day and make sure they don't bang into the walls too hard. The reality is none of us know what the future looks like, but the company that looks at the data has a repeatable process and holds itself to that repeatable process of looking at data, looking at Seller Central in all these different places every day to make sure that everything's looking good. That's the seller that's much more likely to survive than the one that says, hey, I've got a passive income business and I check it when I've got free time. No. You can't go the passive route. It's got to be disciplined. It's got to be repetitive. It's got to be systematic, and you've got to be doing it over and over again to stay on top of what's going on competitively.
Awesome. That's a lot of information to process, but a lot of really good information. I want to talk real quick about the private label brand
Sure.
Part, because what we found at Quiet Light Brokerage is that there is the same hierarchy, exactly what you were talking about, in terms of the appeal of different Amazon businesses. Right? Resellers are unfortunately at the bottom of the totem pole, right? If you're just reselling a product, then there's not going to be as much interest in your product. Second would be those brand agreements, and third would be the private label brand. We have seen those situations where somebody has a private label brand and they're doing really well, but then all of a sudden the marketplace gets flooded with outside competition or lookalike products. I'm thinking of one client in particular who had a really high quality product. It was a product for home bars, and all of a sudden some cheap product just started flooding the marketplace that looked a lot like what she had, just was lower quality. We talk about not being married to the actual product itself. Do you think owning a private label brand is more being able to create new products, or being able to have the relationships to produce things and continually be changing up that product line? Or is it something else? In other words, where's the value there in that product, in the private label brand? Is it in your ability to come up with new product designs, new product ideas? Is it in the relationships to be able to create those products? Or is there something else that really makes a private label brand stand out? Because from a buyer's perspective, I would be thinking, all right, great. Right now, historically over the past 24 months, this business has done really great selling this face cream, but now we know that this face cream is going to go out. How am I going to come up with the next best thing for that? So
there are companies that are really good at doing the analysis to find where where the product gaps are today on Amazon. That's certainly one important skill. Running off to Asia to talk to manufacturers and finding the right manufacturer who can manufacture things at the right price. You need that skill as well. But there's other stuff going on as well that you need to be a successful private label brand. I would argue you need to know how to play the Amazon game. What I mean by that is you need to know how to create amazing listings that are fully optimized. You need to know how to do sponsored products really well and do it in a way where your cost on those ads are lower than everybody else's, because you're so tied. You're looking at the data so carefully that every single word that you bid on, you know exactly what the point is at which it makes sense to be advertising or not bidding higher on particular terms. And then the fourth area that I think most private label brands, especially those on Amazon, most of them overlook is, what are you doing to build an outside source of traffic? What I mean by this is, just because you know how to play the Amazon game and get products out there, find the right products, put them on Amazon, there's 400 million products in the Amazon catalog right now. When you come along with the 400 millionth and first product, nobody cares except for you. So what are you doing to drive traffic to that listing? When you look at some of the biggest and most successful private label brands out there, they're the ones that have built up 50, 60,000 followers in Facebook, and they keep those folks engaged. When they come along with the next slew of product launches, they can go back to that group and say, hey guys, you love our brand, all the things we've done to simplify your lives. Look at these cool new products we've done. And you can get people to come from Facebook over to your new Amazon listings and buy the products at full price. Amazon loves outside traffic. If you can build up this following outside of Amazon and use it to drive traffic to your new listings, your product that started today, but by the end of its first week has already had 100 purchases using your followers. Amazon's algorithm loves that early traffic. And while you've done that without having to compete on Amazon for sponsored products, you're in a position where, quite frankly, if you know how to play the Amazon game, you've got this traffic, you could literally build whatever widget you want, as long as it's logical and customers have some interest in the product. You can build all sorts of products and put them on Amazon, because people get excited about, oh, here's another great opportunity for me to simplify my life, because this company understands how to make great products, and they understand how to merchandise them to me in a way that I feel comfortable, there's low risk. All that kind of stuff is unfortunately overlooked by many, many companies. When I look at private label brands today, I've talked to some private equity companies who are looking at what are essentially private label businesses. And when private equity companies try to value these private label businesses, they'll look at what the actual, the EBITDA is coming out of the Amazon channel and the EBITDA from other channels. I would argue you need to put a value on your social media following, because that's the secret sauce that's going to drive your ability in the future to keep launching new products and getting them to run very, very quickly.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, we see, again, the same thing. And I think when people hear private label, they forget the last word in that phrase, brand, right? Being able to have that actual brand.
Yep.
I've told sellers this before. I've had people ask me what I think about about Amazon businesses, and my response is the same across the board. Now, we sell a lot of Amazon-only businesses, but my recommendation to all buyers and to sellers alike is you need to start building that presence off Amazon as well. Mm-hmm. it's a risky environment in that you're playing by another company's rules entirely if you live entirely on Amazon. I'd never thought about it from the other point, though, that you're saying, which is when you do want to launch that new product, having that outside presence is going to provide an immediate boost. And I think that's super valuable. So when looking at an Amazon opportunity, looking at what exists outside of Amazon would be really crucial for a potential buyer.
Yeah, and sometimes we say, well, how much are you selling off of the Amazon channel? Even if you don't sell that much off the Amazon channel, the fact that you've got this following that you could just as easily say, rather than going and checking out my Amazon listings, let's go look at my Walmart listings or my Jet listings. I can direct all these followers to whatever channel it is I want. So not only am I able to launch products quickly, I could leverage my Facebook following to launch new channels fairly quickly. That's really, really interesting. We can get into a discussion around, do I want to launch all these other marketplaces when they may not generate the same kind of revenue as Amazon? There's good reasons and bad reasons for doing some of these other channels, but the reality is you need to have these assets that you've built outside of Amazon to help whatever channel of sales you're looking to build. So as we think about private label brands who turn over the catalog they have, who aren't tied to the specific products they happen to have today, who've got good unit economics to know exactly which products do and don't make sense, and are in a position where, yes, they've got good sourcing, but the sourcing in many ways is almost an afterthought. It's a lot easier to find a sourcing provider who can get you products within your cost range. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to understand how to play the Amazon game really well, so you can push whatever you want through that Amazon pipe that you've already built.
Fascinating. We're running out of time, but I do want to touch on, I think it was number 2 here. Yeah, the second thing that you were talking about, which was tapping into an existing brand and having that brand exclusive with them, or some sort of exclusive agreement with them. Can you explain real quick for somebody that might not be familiar with that, how that typically works for an Amazon seller who gets that? Are they getting an exclusive agreement with that brand, or I'll let you explain. How does that arrangement work?
Sure. So for brands today that don't have distribution on Amazon, or brands that have somewhat of a mixed bag of distribution of their products, if let's say you're the brand, Mark, and I'm the reseller, and I come to you and I say, hey, Mark, I've noticed you've got a bunch of miscellaneous sellers selling your product. You say, yeah, I don't know who they are. I don't really like it. Can you help me clean this up? And I say, sure. And by the way, I can clean up not only your channel, but I can clean up your catalog. And I can clean up your advertising. And I can do what you probably want to be doing as a brand, making sure that you get more than your fair share of voice, more than your fair share of sales on the Amazon channel. Most brands will say, I don't even know where to start. If you can do that, that's great. So then the reseller says, listen, I will make certain promises to you in terms of cleaning up your listings, figuring out ways to clean up the channel, and making certain advertising investments. In exchange for doing that, I want you to give me a 12-month exclusive, or a 16-month or an 18-month exclusive, where I'm the only authorized seller of your product on the Amazon channel. And for a lot of brands, they'll say, yeah, that's great. Just keep it in stock. Make sure you keep it at certain price points, and everybody's happy. The problem is, even if you're the only authorized seller, you still have a bunch of unauthorized sellers that could potentially show up because the brand doesn't have complete control of its distribution. So you get into a situation where you've got to work with the brand to figure out, do they have online reseller policy? Do they have a MAP policy? Are they enforcing these documents? Are they communicating loud and clearly with the distributors and their resellers to say, you're not allowed to sell on Amazon. And if we catch you on Amazon, we're going to shut you off of our product. So for companies that are that authorized reseller on Amazon, they often think, oh, great, I've been handed a monopoly. You haven't really been handed a monopoly. You've just been handed a bigger share of the pie available for sales in that particular brand. If you're good at working with the attorneys of the brand, you can look at ways to clean up the channel, and there are definitely some ways that can be done. But it's more than just being a general merchandiser, where it's every guy who fills a PO or sends a PO into the brand gets access to inventory. You don't want the brand to be saying, sure, we'll sell whoever, whatever our product. Most brands don't understand the dynamics of an open marketplace like Amazon. They don't understand that by selling to 5 different guys who are all selling the same product on Amazon, they all have the same incentive to drive prices down to try to win the sale. So if you can educate the brand to say, listen, it's not in your best interest to have all this competition within a channel. Don't have that competition. Let me be the only one that's authorized to sell, and let's try to figure out a way to get rid of all these other guys who are selling. So it's by no means a perfect model, but it's a much better model than being just your general merchandiser.
So with that, in terms of sustainability, if you're signing a 12, 18-month contract with an eye towards sustainability, I mean, what's the risk there of that contract not being renewed, or the brand saying after 18 months, hey, you've done an okay job, but we think we're going to try this on our own now. Is that something you see pretty often, or if you're doing a good job, do most brands just say, keep at it?
Some brands recognize they have no interest in becoming B2C experts. Other brands say, wait a minute, this FBA thing, maybe I could use it myself and I could cut you out and make retail margins. Yeah, that sometimes happens. So the reality is what you do today to show value to the brand may not be acceptable, may not be good enough for what you need to show the brand next year. Next year, you may have to say, you know what, I'm going to help you get your product into Amazon UK or Amazon Germany. The brand says, oh, great, you can do that too? Sure, I'll renew the contract for another year. And then in another year or 2 years or whatever, you have to say, well, now I'm going to help you do new product research to help you figure out what the next products are that you might want to be building on Amazon. And you end up in the situation where this exclusive reseller is doing a lot of the same kind of research that a new private label seller on Amazon might be doing, but they're just sharing that data with the existing brand from whom they're exclusively wholesaling product. So it's yes, a brand can pull back that exclusive when the contract is done. And yes, some brands may not, in fact, follow the terms of the exclusive agreement they've signed. But my concept here is, how do you put more and more ability for the reseller to have some kind of competitive advantage? And being the exclusive reseller is better than not being the exclusive reseller, but it's still by no means a perfect distribution model.
Awesome. All right. Well, our time is basically up here, but this has been super helpful and super interesting. Again, Prosper Show is coming up in March of 2018. I'm going to be there, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Great. Thanks for having me on today, Mark.
All right. Thanks, James.